the autumn of 1884, in the Big Belt Mountains of Montana Territory, a mountain man named Elias Ford opened his cabin door in the middle of a hard, cold rain and found a woman standing on his step. She was not the woman he was expecting. That is the whole engine of this story, so hold on to it. She stood there, soaked to the bone, a cowgirl in a man's oilskin, with her hat brim pouring water like a roof gutter, and she had ridden 2.5 days into country where women did not ride. To say 5 words she had practiced 200 times. She had an envelope inside her coat, wrapped in oilcloth, over her heart, the way you carry something you are afraid of and cannot put down. The 5 words were these. The letters were from me. 50 letters, 2 years of them. 50 letters that had traveled from a ranch kitchen on the Musselshell up to this cabin above the snow line, each one signed in a round, careful hand with her sister's name. The man in the doorway was 6 feet and some of buckskin and black beard, a man who had not spoken to more than 4 humans in a year. He looked at her for a long, long moment, rain roaring on the shakes, and what he said back to her, there in the doorway, is the reason people in that valley were still telling this story 50 years later, when the highway came through. We will get to what he said. I promise you that, and I keep my promises better than Rose Hartley kept hers, but a confession only means something if you know the whole size of the lie. So we go back 2 years, to a summer kitchen, a newspaper, and a dare that should have stayed a joke. The story runs through the letters themselves. They were saved, every one. Listen to what they say, and listen harder to what they hide. Dear Mr. Ford, I read your notice in the Herald. My name is Clara Hartley. I am 22 years of age, fair-haired, and considered agreeable. If your mountains are half as handsome as the paper makes them, I should like to hear about them. Yours in good faith, Clara Hartley. It started, as a fair amount of frontier trouble did, with a matrimonial notice. The Hartley Ranch sat on decent grass south of the Musselshell River, and it was a place with too much work and not enough hands. Rose Hartley was 26, the elder daughter, the one folks meant when they said that outfit is well run. She had been in the saddle since age 5. She broke her own colts, kept the books, pulled calves in April sleet, and had refused 2 proposals from men who, as she put it, were courting the ranch and tolerating the rider. Clara Hartley was 22 and had the kind of prettiness that rearranges a room. She hated cows, dust, wind, and quiet, in that order, and she was determined to marry into town, which was her perfect right, and nobody begrudged her it. On a July evening, Clara read aloud from the Miles City paper, in her theater voice, for the family's amusement. A notice, 3 lines. Hunter and trapper, 34, of sound habits, holdings in the Big Belts, seeks correspondence with a woman of honest disposition. Object, matrimony. E. Ford. Clara thought it was the funniest thing in the paper. A mountain man, advertising like a lost dog. She announced she would answer it as a lark, to see what such a creature would write back, and their father laughed into his coffee, and the whole thing would have died there. Except Clara could not spell. She could dazzle, but on paper her letters looked like a fence in a flood, and she knew it, so she flopped down across from her sister and said what she had said 100 times since childhood. You write it, Rosie. You make it sound nice. I'll sign it. Except Clara did not even sign it. She got bored halfway through the composing and went off to try a new ribbon, and Rose sat alone at the lamp with a half-written letter to a stranger in the mountains. I would like to tell you, Rose agonized. She did not. She finished it as a favor, signed her sister's name the way she signed half of Clara's correspondence, sealed it, and thought no more about it than you think about a fence staple. It is worth saying plainly, because it is the truth. The great lie of Rose Hartley's life began as a chore. You asked what the mountains are like in October. Ma'am, they are like a church the size of the sky, right after the sermon, when everyone has gone home and the quiet is still warm. I do not have the words for it. I am sorry. You deserve better words. E.F. The answer came back in 3 weeks, and it was not what anyone expected. The mountain man could write. Not fancy, not schooled, but true. The way a well-built gate is true. He described his world in short, plain sentences that landed like stones in still water. The smell of the first snow. A grisly track by the creek, wide as a dinner plate. What loneliness does to a man's voice. How he had caught himself explaining the weather to a mule. Clara skimmed the first reply, pronounced it sweet, and lost interest forever, because a man who owned no piano and no street to walk down was not a man, in her arithmetic, at all. But the letter sat on the kitchen table for a week, and Rose kept picking it up. She answered it. Just to be polite, she told herself. Somebody ought to. And when his next letter asked, innocently, what her days were like, Rose did something she had no name for at the time. She answered him honestly. Everything but the name at the bottom. She wrote about pulling a breech calf at 3 in the morning and standing in the corral after, shaking, bloody to the shoulder, watching it stand up on its silly stilt legs while the sun came up. She wrote about her father's cough. She wrote about how a woman who runs a ranch gets called ma'am to her face and something else behind the barn. She wrote the things she had never said out loud to a living soul, because you can say anything to a man you will never meet. His replies came steadily, a month apart, then closer. He never flattered. He asked the second question, the one under the first one. When she mentioned the 2 proposals she had turned down, his next letter asked only this: did you refuse them because of what they wanted, or because of what they could not see? Rose read that sentence in the barn doorway and had to lean on the frame. By the 9th letter, she had stopped pretending she was writing for Clara. She was writing for herself. She just was not signing for herself. That is how it goes, with the kind of lie that ruins good people. There is never a day where you decide. There are only mornings where you do not stop. If it is not too forward, I would be glad of a likeness. I have built a shelf by the window, east-facing, where the morning light is kindest, and it is a foolish, empty shelf at present. E.F. The photograph nearly ended it, and it should have. You cannot mail a lie a picture of itself. Rose sat with his request for 11 days. The honest road was right there, wide open, 1 sentence long. Instead, she took the coward's fork, and here the record should be fair to her, because the coward's fork had help. Clara was between beaus that month, and found the whole revived correspondence hilarious. Of course he could have a picture, she said. She had a fresh one, taken in Miles City in her blue dress, and what did it matter? She would never meet the man. She was proud of that photograph. It showed her at her very best, which was considerable. So the photograph of Clara Hartley went up the mountain, and Rose Hartley, who took a plain picture and knew it, told herself it was a kindness all around. Nobody would ever be hurt. The man got a pretty picture for his shelf. Clara got her vanity aired, and Rose got to keep the letters coming, which by then, though she would not have confessed it under torture, was the true accounting. His response should have eased her. It did the opposite. He thanked them, polite as ever. He said the likeness was very fine. And then he wrote a sentence that Rose read 30 times that winter. It is a fine face, though I confess, I cannot find the 3 a.m. calf in it, nor the ledger, nor the wind. I expect photographs miss things. The letters miss nothing. He knew. Some part of her knew that some part of him knew. The face in the frame and the voice on the page did not add up to one woman, and a man who could track a lion over shale rock could surely track a mismatch across 17 letters. But winter was coming down on both of them, and neither one pulled the thread. People protect the things that keep them warm. His letters kept coming through the snow, hauled up the last stretch by a half-Shoshone mail carrier named Lewis, who snowshoed the High Line once a month, and later swore that Ford met him at the tree line every mail day an hour early, in any weather, like a man waiting on medicine. It is 2 a.m, and I am writing because I cannot sleep, and there is no one awake in 400 miles I can say this to. Papa's cough has turned. The doctor wants him south for a winter, and there is no money for it. And I am the wall this whole outfit leans on, and tonight I would give a year of my life to lean on something myself. Do not answer this one kindly. I could not bear it. Just tell me about the snow. That was letter 19, written in February of the first winter, 4 pages at 2 a.m, and it was the letter that changed everything on both ends of the trail, though neither writer knew what it was changing. Rose almost did not send it. She read it over at dawn, appalled at herself, at the nakedness of it. A stranger, a man she had never met, addressed under a false name, and she had opened the one door she kept barred, even against her own family. She carried the letter in her coat for 2 days. Then the mail rider came through, and her father coughed in the next room, that new sound with the tear in it, and she handed the letter over before she could think better, the way you jump cold water. His answer took 5 weeks, because it was deep winter on the High Line. He did as she asked. He did not answer kindly, not in the way she feared. There was no pity in it anywhere. He told her about the snow, exactly as ordered, 6 feet of it on the north slopes, and a marten he had watched tunnel under it like a swimmer. And then, at the bottom, without ceremony, he wrote that a wall is only as good as its footing, and that hers, from where he sat, was set deeper than most churches, and that he was sending along a bundle of pelts to the Duck Creek post with instructions to credit the sale to her family's account, because, he wrote, I have more winter than I can use, and you have more need, and between friends, that is not charity, it is freight. The pelt money reached the ranch in March through the storekeeper at Duck Creek, listed as proceeds of an old debt owed to her father, a fiction so thin that only a sick man wanting to believe it could have believed it. It was enough to send him south until the thaw. He came back in May with color in his face, and 3 more years in him, and he never learned where the debt had come from, and he died, those 3 years later, still calling it luck. Rose knew. Rose spent the rest of that winter doing sums she could not make come out even. A man she had never met, courting a photograph of one sister, had quietly saved the life of the other sister's father, on the strength of 4 pages written at 2 a.m. There was no ledger column for that. There was no way to pay it back that did not begin with the truth, and the truth had grown a winter bigger while she slept. Just tell me about the snow, she had written. He had told her about the snow. He had also, without being asked, held up her sky through the worst month of her life, from 40 miles away, with a bundle of pelts and 1 sentence about footings. You can call what Rose Hartley felt after that winter a great many things. She herself, being honest in all matters but one, finally called it by its right name, and having named it, she was ruined for turning back. A woman may abandon a lark. She does not abandon the only person who ever saw the wall and asked about the footing. So the letters went on, and the lie went on under them, quiet as rot in a good beam. Now this story owes you the other side of the mountain, because Elias Ford was carrying a secret of his own, and it is time you had it. Elias Ford could barely read when the first letter came. He had gone up the mountains at 14, after a stepfather with hard fists, and his schooling had stopped where his walking started. He could work out a supply list, sign his name, spell his way through a trap company invoice with a finger under each word. That was the whole of it. The matrimonial notice itself had been written for him, as a favor, by the storekeeper's wife down at the Duck Creek trading post, a kind woman named Mrs. Petty, who had decided that a man that decent had no business dying alone on a mountain. When Clara's first letter arrived, Elias carried it to Mrs. Petty, with his hat in his hands, and asked her to read it to him. She did, and she wrote down his answer as he spoke it, and that is why those early replies sound the way they do. They sound like a man talking, because they were. But then the letters changed. Somewhere around the 9th, the woman on the paper stopped being agreeable and started being real, with calves and ledgers and a father's cough, and Elias found he could not stand having Mrs. Petty between him and that voice. It was not shame exactly. It was that the letters had become the kind of thing a man does not read out loud in a store. So Elias Ford, 34 years old, sat down in a one-room cabin above the snow line with a primer Mrs. Petty gave him and a stack of letters, and taught himself to read properly, that whole first winter, by lamplight, using her sentences as his school books. He read them until the paper went soft at the folds. He copied out her words to learn their spelling, so that in a very real way his handwriting grew up inside hers, and when he wrote back, he wrote alone now, slow as surveying, a page a night. I have seen men do hard things in that country. I put this among the hardest and the finest. He never told her, in the letters, what she had been to him that winter. He only wrote, in the spring, one line she did not fully understand until much later. Whatever else is true of this world, ma'am, I want you to know your words taught a man his letters, and there is no gift bigger than that in it. Rose read that line at the kitchen table and wept without one sound, the way women weep in houses where everyone needs them steady. She did not know yet exactly what it meant. She knew it was the realest thing anyone had ever said to her, and she had built it all on her sister's name. That was the arithmetic she went to sleep on, every night for 2 years. I am not a rich man, but the cabin is tight, the range is honest, and there is a shelf by an east window waiting. I am asking, plain as I know how, will you come up the mountain and be my wife, train fare enclosed? If the answer is no, keep the fare for your trouble, and think no ill of me. E.F. The proposal came in the 40th letter. No, 41st. Rose kept them numbered, and that detail alone should tell you the size of what she had let happen. Folded inside was more money than the Hartley ranch cleared in some months. Train fare, stage fare, and a margin for a wedding dress, if, he wrote, she was the sort who wanted one, and a note that if she was not, the money spent just as well on a good saddle. Rose sat at the table with the money and the letter, and the whole 2 years, and the walls of the lie came down on her all at once, the way a snow cornice lets go, quietly, total, because the proposal was not addressed to her. On paper, a man named Elias Ford had just asked Clara Hartley to marry him. Clara, to her credit, and the record should give her this, was horrified, not at the deception, which she had never taken seriously enough to notice growing, at the result. Marry a trapper on a mountain? She actually laughed, then saw her sister's face and stopped. And then Clara Hartley, who missed a great deal, but was not cruel, looked at Rose, really looked, possibly for the first time in years, and said, slowly, the way you say something you have just discovered is true. Rosie, you love him. The kitchen was very quiet. Send the money back, Clara said, gentler than anyone had ever heard her. But you take it up there yourself, and when he opens that door, you tell him whose hand he's been reading. The train fare sat on the Hartley kitchen table for 3 days, and for 3 days the house talked around it in low voices, the way houses do when something on a table is really a question. Because here is the ugly human truth of that week, and this story does not get to skip it. The money was a road out of more troubles than one. The ranch had debts. The proposal had come to Clara's name, and Clara had a suitor in town who was taking his sweet time, and there was one evening, one single bad evening, when their mother, who was tired and frightened about the notes coming due, wondered aloud whether Clara might not just go on up the mountain after all. A tight cabin, a steady man with money to spare. Plenty of marriages had started on less. Clara said absolutely not, with unusual firmness. But it was Rose the words landed on, and everyone at that table knew it, including Rose. She went out to the barn, the place she did her real thinking, and she stood in the dark, with the horses breathing around her, and looked at the whole shape of the thing at last. She could keep silent, and the correspondence would simply die, the way such things died on the frontier all the time, distance closing over it like water. He would wait through one more winter, and stop writing, and tell himself he had been a fool, up there alone with 50 letters in a pine box. No one would ever know. The ranch would limp along. Nothing would break that showed, except that a man who had taught himself to read on her sentences would spend the rest of his life believing the truest correspondence of his years had been some parlor game that got bored of him. Rose Hartley stood in the barn a long time. Then she went inside, took the money off the table, and wrapped it in oilcloth. And the question stopped being whether to tell him, and became only whether she could sit a saddle for 40 mountain miles with her heart in her mouth the whole way. Her father watched her pack the next morning. He was a spare man with his words by then, saving his breath for breathing. But he followed her out to the corral, and while she caught the buckskin, he said the only thing he ever said about the whole affair, which suggests he had understood a good deal more of it, and for a good deal longer, than anyone credited. "Whatever you signed," he said, "you wrote the truth in those pages or you didn't. If you did, girl, then the only forgery left to fix is the name. Go fix it." He put his own slicker on her saddle, the good one, and went back inside, coughing his quiet 3-year cough, and stood at the window until she was out of sight over the bench. Rose cried for the first mile, which she would deny all her life. The buckskin, a horse of great tact, pretended not to notice. By the second mile she was done, and her chin was set in the way the whole Musselshell country knew, and the rest, up ahead in the rain, you already know is coming. 2.5 days of mountain, 1 door, 5 words. "Dear Mr. Ford, do not send any more letters until I have come and gone. There is something that must be said with a face, and I am bringing it. R." She sent that note ahead by the mail carrier, unsigned except for a single initial, which after 2 years of forged signatures was its own small honesty, and then she packed for the mountains. Her father argued. There were road agents, early storms, 40 miles of country with no roof in it. Rose saddled the buckskin anyway and tied on a slicker and enough food for 5 days. And her father, who had watched her back down exactly nothing since age 5, gave up and checked her cinch instead, which in that family was the whole conversation about love. 2.5 days she rode, up out of the grass and into the lodgepole, along creeks the color of gin, into that church-sized quiet he had written about in the 9th letter, and she saw for the first time with her own eyes all the things she had read in his hand. The shale slope where the lion had crossed. Now the rain caught her, the hard gray autumn kind, and she rode the last 4 hours, soaked and rehearsing. 5 words. The letters were from me. She had imagined every way it could go. He would curse her off the mountain. He would stand silent and closed like the timber, and let her ride away smaller than she came. He would laugh, worst of all, the way men laugh at a plain woman standing in the ruin of a pretty lie. She took the 200 rehearsals and the wrapped envelope with every cent of his money, and she knocked on the door of the cabin she had furnished in her mind for 2 years. It opened, buckskin, black beard, and the smell of wood smoke and cedar. Above his head, she could see the east window, and the shelf. The shelf was not empty. That was the first thing that broke her rehearsal. On the shelf, in a neat pine box with a glass front that a man had plainly built with enormous care, were letters. 50 of them, tied in bundles with trap cord. Where the photograph of Clara should have stood, there was no photograph at all. "The letters were from me," Rose said. The 5 words, exactly, before her nerve went. "Every one. Clara never wrote a line. The face in the picture isn't the person you know. I signed my sister's name 50 times, and I have brought your money back, and I am sorrier than I have words for, and you deserved the truth on paper long ago, and I could not risk the letters stopping." The rain roared. "That's the whole of it. That's what I came to say." Elias Ford looked at her for that long, long moment I told you about at the beginning. "I know," he said. "Rain and the creek and her own heart. Nothing else in the world made a sound." "You know," Rose said. "Come in, out of the wet," said Elias Ford, "and I'll tell you since when." "Since the calf," he said, "or near enough." Letter 10:11. A man reads 50 descriptions of a working cowgirl's days. He starts to see her hands. Rope burns and lye soap. Then a photograph arrives of a woman with hands that had never in their life held anything heavier than a hymn book, and a face with no wind in it, and the 2 women would not sit together in his mind, no matter how he arranged them. For a while he had assumed something crueler, that a pretty woman was having sport with a lonely man. Letters as parlor entertainment. It had a name back then. Some women collected mountain men's letters like pressed flowers. He had half decided to stop writing. "What changed?" Rose asked. "Letter 19, he said, without hesitating, and she knew the one before he said it. Her father's cough had turned that February. She had written 4 pages at 2 in the morning, terrified, about medicine and money and what it is to be the person a whole outfit leans on, with no wall behind your own back. "Nobody sporting with a stranger writes that page," he said. That page was a woman with her hand in the fire. Whoever she was, whatever name went at the bottom, the letters were the true thing, and he had decided, that night, to court the letters and let the name sort itself out. "You might have asked," Rose said. "You might have signed," said Elias. And that was fair, and they both knew it, and something that had been wound tight for 2 years let go in the room. He made coffee. She dried by the fire. He told her that when the mail carrier brought her unsigned note, 1 initial and a promise of a face, he had taken the photograph down off the shelf that same evening and put the letters up in its place, because whichever woman came up that mountain, he wanted her to see plainly which one he had been waiting for. "I don't have Clara's face," Rose said once, quietly, because it had to be said in the open. Elias Ford picked up her hand, turned it over, and looked at the rope scars across the palm, the way other men look at photographs. "There's the 3 a.m. calf," he said, touching one. "There's the ledger. There's the wind." He closed her hand in both of his. "Ma'am, I learned to read on your letters. You are the only book I ever finished. What in creation would I want with a picture? Dear Rose. This will be short, as you are 20 feet away frying trout, and I am only writing it because a thing this size ought to be in the record in my own hand. It was always you." Signed with her whole name, at last. Elias Ford's wife. They were married the following June, at the ranch on the Mussel Shell, so her father would not have to travel on his bad lungs. Clara stood up for her sister in the blue dress from the photograph, delighted with the poetry of it, and cried harder than anyone, and caught the bouquet, and married her town clerk the next spring, and was, by every account, happy in exactly the life she had always wanted. Both sisters got the right mountain. It just took the letters 2 years to sort the mail. Rose kept the ranch books for both places all her life, riding between the grass and the high country with the seasons. The pine box with the glass front hung in the cabin, and then, when they built the bigger house down at the tree line, over its hearth, all 50 letters and the 51st, the short one, in the middle, in its own frame. Laura Ingalls Wilder, who homesteaded through those same hard years, wrote later, "It is the sweet, simple things of life which are the real ones after all." The Fords had a plain-spoken version of the same creed, and their grandchildren repeated it at both funerals, held 1 month apart, because neither one, folks said, was ever going to let the other get more than a month's ride ahead. Say the true thing. Sign your own name to it. The rest is weather. If this one found you, there are more waiting where it came from, complete, beginning to end, every week, here on the Cowgirl Chronicles. Come sit by the fire again. I'll leave the gate open.